É a resenha da gringa, mano. Então vamos ver aqui, mano, os vídeos que estão na atualidade, mano. Tá ligado, pessoal? Esse do computador aqui. A gente tava vendo. Vamos prosseguir. Vamos dar continuação aqui. Calma. O que temos aqui, né, mano? Qual o vídeo da gringa aqui? Que, segundo as informações, né? Vamos assistir, meu mano. Nem sei qual eu apertei, mano, mas tamo aí. Vamos ver esse homem.
Hey, what's up, guys? This is Brian at Whisper Status 74. Welcome to the community. Welcome to the channel. If this is the first time you are seeing me, please consider liking and subscribing. We are real tech for real people. Today's video is going to be on the Sony X90J. The last several videos have been on this brand new 2021 mid-range full array local dimming LED from Sony that I have here courtesy of Value Electronics. Now, the last videos have been on this panel. We've covered gameplay, we've covered some of the settings. Today we're going to do my initial thoughts or my early thoughts. This will not be a full review. I'll tell you some of the things that I like about it, some of the things that I don't like about it, and after that we'll do some PS5 gameplay.
Muito chato, mano, muito chato. Segundo informações aqui, né, mano? Vamos ver isso aqui, parceiro, parece ser bom. Vamos aqui pra gente recolher nossas recompensas. Será que dá certo? Será que tá pagando, mano? É resenha. Vamos ver o que vai acontecer. Maglabe.
This microwave oven should be a familiar sight. Most people have a microwave in their homes, but few know how they actually work. The secret is this device, known
Como
as a
que é o
magnetron.
funcionamento do micro-ondas? Isso aí eu conheço. Fala!
The magnetron consists of two permanent magnets flanking a copper ring. The ring has a copper rod in the
Vai
middle,
onde?
a filament made of tungsten and thorium coils around the rod.
É pra fazer o quê?
Between the rod and the ring is a vacuum.
Vai deitar.
The copper rod is a cathode, or negatively charged electrode.
Então vou levar lá pra... Pode pegar, levar pro tamanho? Eu
A positively charged
E olha aí de baixo.
An electric field
Demora não.
exists between these two electrodes.
Cai, pega aqui um pedacinho logo. Que pedacinho? E olha de baixo.
Vai lavar a mão.
When you
Cara.
turn the
Olha
microwave
de baixo,
on,
de baixo
a
do canto.
current
Ah, esses dois aqui é meu já.
negatively
Minha
charged
mãe não comeu,
electrons
deixa eu ver
travel
que
through it,
grande é isso.
generating a lot
Pô, o
of
que
heat.
vocês querem, cara?
Eventually, the filament gets so
Olha
hot
de baixo,
that
deixa ela
electrons
crocante,
boil
cara.
off the surface, so to speak. Because there is a vacuum between the cathode copper rod and the anode
Ah,
copper
peraí.
ring,
Não, do tamanho
those
que
boiled
ele
off electrons are easily propelled by
Ai,
the
tá
electric
comendo
field
meu.
attracted to the positive anode. This is where the magnets come in. The north end of one of the magnets faces the south end of the second. So the copper ring and rod are inside the magnetic field
bobina.
created between those two magnets. This magnetic field bends the path of the electrons moving from the filament to the copper ring. Called the Lorentz force, this force causes those electrons to spiral as they leave the filament, forming a sort of pinwheel in the vacuum. The tips of this pinwheel and the negative charge concentrated there pass over grooves cut into the inner surface of the copper ring at regular intervals. As the negative charge comes and goes across the mouth, it creates an electromagnetic wave inside that groove of a very particular frequency, a microwave. An antenna directs those microwaves into a waveguide, which then delivers them to the chamber where the food is. The microwaves bounce back and forth between the chamber's metal walls, heating up the food. How exactly do microwaves cook the food? Inside the food are countless water molecules. Water molecules are polarized, charged positively on one end and negatively on the other. When exposed to a microwave's electric field, they want to align with it. Since the waves are always moving, creating a series of constant flipping electric fields, water molecules, in turn, are constantly flipping as they try to align with those fields. Your microwave's frequency is designed to heat up the water inside your food. If you put something with little to no water in it, like freeze-dried ice cream, it would not warm up very much. And And that's how it works.
Olha, tu comeu um negócio
Electricity,
todo.
magnets, and a vacuum
Pelo
tube.
amor de Deus.
Another incredible invention made possible with the power of electromagnetism.
Ah, tu comeu caramba, né? Pode ter comido não. Ah, voltou pra saída?
Não, comeram um aí, mas lá entendeu?
Ah, mas me dava assim mesmo, não interessa, vai pro cacete, tá mentiroso? Mentiroso, caramba. Ah, o vídeo tá agora vai estar cru.
Não, essa daí tá boa.
Mas aí.
Eu. Fulano.
Você é engraçadinho, eu vou te comprar até fazer um terremoto. Antes de comer. Cadê a Adriane?
Foi levar metade pra Giovana.
Foi essa na Giovana?
Tô brincando. Não, você tá assando aí, Patrícia. Vamos lá. Vamos adicionar a verba na conta. Será que é isso mesmo, parceiro? Vamos lá, vamos lá, vamos lá. Várias paradas aí, né? Diz eles que...
Deixa eu guardar ali, vai.
Não, parceiro?
Eu tava lá, né? Tirando o cu do Isaac.
Tem que guardar mágoa, cara. Vamos ver esse aqui, ó. Os iPhone. Vamos ver o vídeo, parceiro.
Olha, ele tem uma pizza grande.
So the pubs have finally, praise the Lord Jesus, reopened, and you went a little bit mental and spent all of your lockdown savings on a bathtub's worth of booze. But then you also went and buggered up your trusty phone by dropping it in a bucket of sangria or unleashing hot vomit fury all over the thing. Well, never fear, my friend, because in 2021 you've got a tidy choice of budget-friendly smartphones that are well worth seeking out. Motorola, Xiaomi, Oppo, Nokia, and loads of others offer slick, shiny slabs boasting brilliant battery life, flexible camera setups, and enough grunt to blaze through games like PUBG and Call of Duty, all for a budget under 200 quid. And I'm not even kidding, there's been a torrent of fresh new budget smartphones launched in 2021. I've been reviewing as many of the wee buggers as possible, so here's my roundup of the best budget-friendly smartphones under £200 you can grab yourself in the UK right now that I've personally tried out. And for more on the latest and greatest tech, please do subscribe and ding that notifications bell. Cheers! So one of the best new budget smartphones you'll find at this cheapy price point is Motorola's fresh Moto G30, a 159 quid handset that offers a strong everyday experience. Like most budget phones, this is another plastic blower offering little in the way of frills or flair, although it is at least splash resistant if you have yourself a bit of an accident. What you have here is a stock Android experience that's very easy to get along with all those standard features that we know and love, like a dark mode and proper gesture navigation, plus some very worthy Motorola extras like a badass choppy torch effort. The 6.5 IPS screen is unfortunately only a 720p res effort, so it's not exactly supremely crisp, but visuals are reasonably punchy, and you do get a 90Hz refresh, so everything looks buttery smooth. The Snapdragon 662 chipset can handle fast-paced games like Call of Duty Mobile, no bother, and Motorola's dedicated gaming mode can manage resources out of sight and block pesky notifications from buggering up your concentration. The 5000 mAh battery will happily keep you going all day long, even if you polish the Moto G30 a fair bit. Meanwhile, the camera tech is perfectly respectable too. That 64 megapixel primary sensor does typically struggle in stronger low light, but otherwise it can snap some decent looking pics of the fam, although the video mode does top off at full HD resolution. And all the other features that you would hope for and expect from the Moto G30 are present and correct as well, including a good bit of NFC for your contactless payments. You've got some micro SD memory card support to expand the onboard storage, and a tasty bit of headphone jack action too. Overall, a very respectable package indeed. But an alternative budget Motorola smartphone option if you can't get your mitts on the Moto G30 or you'd prefer some slicker looking visuals, is the still rather lovable Moto G9 Plus from last year. This is another plastic blower with a stock Android experience and an IPS screen, but this time it's an even more flippin' massive 6.8 incher, and it's a bit of a blinder too, pumping out natural looking Full HD Plus visuals with HDR10 Plus support chucked on top. Although unlike the G30, there's sadly no variable refresh rate to speak of. Performance is pretty smooth thanks to the Snapdragon 730G chipset with that capable Adreno 618 GPU, and Moto's gaming tools once again making for a satisfying PUBG or Call of Duty experience. Again, you got a 5000 mAh capacity battery crammed into that plastic fantastic body, and once again it will happily last you the day no matter how much time you spend on your blower. And you got all those other features like the NFC and the micro SD support as you would expect. The package is rounded off by a perfectly decent 64 meg primary camera backed by an 8 megapixel ultra wide angle effort just like the Moto G30. Plus you've also got some macro and depth sensor shenanigans. All in all, it's perfectly fine for everyday shooting, even in fairly testing conditions. And even if that didn't quite butter your muffin, well, Motorola has a shagload of other budget-friendly smartphones under that £200 price point in 2021, including the also very mighty indeed Moto G9 Power. This is yet another hand-filling 6.8-inch blower that lacks thrills and excitement, but more than makes up for it with respectable specs for around 170 of your British pounds. Performance is reasonably dependable thanks to once again that Snapdragon 662 platform backed by 4 gigs of RAM. You can get stuck into some light gaming if you want to blow off some steam by blowing off someone else's skull. And of course, with a name like Power, you would expect some pretty supreme battery life out of this thing, and that's definitely a winner here. The Moto G9 Power rocks a 6000 milliamp capacity battery that'll easily keep you going for a full day, even if you're basically never off the damn thing, and it'll last you 2 full days if you don't go too nuts. The G9 Power is fine for media streaming, although the IPS screen once again drops from Full HD to 720p res, while the stereo speaker setup has also been culled, but thankfully not that headphone jack. Meanwhile, the triple lens rear camera, spearheaded by a 64 megapixel sensor, is unsurprisingly limited, and you do lose the Plus model's 8 megapixel ultra wide angle shooter, although the Moto G9 Power can still take good looking photos in respectable lighting, helped along by Motorola's AI smarts. Alternatively, for 10 bob less, you can bag yourself the Moto G9 Player, which at just 6.4 inches is a bit of a blessing for more stubby troll-like fingered people like myself, although the battery capacity and the camera tech are also scaled back. Now, another brand that offers straight-laced stock Android smartphones for a budget-friendly price point in 2021 is Nokia, and the fresh new Nokia 5.4 is a respectable package for just 150 quid. This 6.4-inch blower suffers from standard Nokia tropes like the fat lip down below, harbouring some needless branding, and of course that always pointless assistant button. But this dusk model is rather fetching in a moody emo kind of way. We're still waiting on that Android 11 upgrade, unfortunately, which is rather grating to say the least, but that should eventually take through, and then supposedly we'll be getting an Android 12 update once that's available as well, plus 3 years of security updates just for an added bit of reassurance. You've got NFC support here in the UK and the dual SIM support as well, plus a separate micro SD slot to expand that storage. Meanwhile, the IPS screen is a mere 720p panel, but it's fine for streaming YouTube or browsing the old internet. Power and proceedings is the Snapdragon 662 chipset again, and once again this is fine for gaming on the go, while the 4000 mAh battery is near impossible to drain in a single day unless you really bloody punish this thing. And last up, that 48 megapixel rear primary sensor was absolutely fine for your everyday pics of the family and all that good stuff, but the video recording was a bit of a mess, lots of focal popping and other issues like that. So I'd say if you want to shoot lots of home movies of the Sprongs doing cute stuff, then you might want to look elsewhere. Personally, I'd rather grab myself an Oppo A53, which costs as little as 130 bob in 2021. This phone is a bit of a superstar, offering a smooth everyday experience, around 2 days of battery life between charges, and all the standard stuff like NFC and that expandable storage. The display is a mere HD effort once again, but it's not bad at all for kicking back with some YouTube or whatever, and impressively you do have a 90Hz max refresh rate too, not to mention a stereo speaker setup and strong audio chops. The Oppo A53 is still stock on creaky old Android 10 at the time I shot this, at least it was for me, and not everyone will delight in that clunky old Colour OS launcher either. But the Snapdragon 460 chipset and 120Hz touch response rate meant I stood a reasonable chance against the hordes of unwashed school kids when stumbling my way through online slugfests. And that 13-megapixel primary camera does a decent job of daily snaps, certainly for this asking price. Moving on, and of course it's impossible to round up the best budget smartphones in 2021 without a hot bit of Xiaomi action, especially as the rather bloody, brilliant Poco X3 NFC is still one of the best blows around at this price point. The name's still a bit clunky, but the Poco X3 NFC says up the kind of specs and features you usually find for about 100 quid more. Let's start with that gorgeous 6.7-inch Full HD IPS screen, which boasts HDR10 support and tops off at a whopping 120Hz refresh rate, something you don't even find on a lot of flagship phones. Movies sound good over the stereo speakers, and you've got a headphone jack for plugging in and enjoying proper high-res audio. This is one of the first smartphones to pack in Qualcomm's Snapdragon 732G platform, so you can absolutely blaze through games like Call of Duty and PUBG no worries, especially as Xiaomi found space for 6 gigs of RAM in this plastic wonder. And the Poco X3 NFC rounds off its general awesomeness with a nice, tasty 5000 mAh battery and a 64-megapixel primary camera that can capture decent-looking shots in ample conditions. If you can't quite stretch up to that near £200 asking price, well, Poco still has you kind of covered with the reasonably good Poco M3. Despite costing closer to the £100 mark, you still get a Full HD Plus resolution display, this 6.53-inch beast, which is definitely commendable. The snazzy yellow version is certainly eye-catching, and you get the same Snapdragon 662 chipset that was packed inside of the Moto G9 Play and Power, so gaming on titles like Call of Duty and PUBG is all good. But one of my favourite bits of the Poco M3 is that 6000 mAh battery, a match for the Moto G9 Power, so again, you can punish this thing as much as you like, it'll keep you going all day long, no sweat. The Poco M3 can be rather quirky at times, however, and the camera is very basic at best, but overall it is worth that price. And also, as a heads up, Xiaomi often has random little sales and discounts on its smartphones on Mi.com, so definitely keep an eye on that if you're after a budget smartphone. Quite often the likes of the Mi 10T Lite will creep under that £200 price point. That's definitely still one of my favourite budget 5G smartphones right now. I managed to grab it for 190 quid in one of those sales, so yeah, definitely well worth having a squint at. But of course, one Xiaomi smartphone the awards have to wait to be discounted is the Redmi 9, which is a very respectable alternative to that Poco M3. This 6.5-inch phone is a lovable beast, pumping out Full HD visuals and lasting for yonks with its similarly huge battery. You don't get the 120Hz refresh rate or the HDR support or the stereo speaker setup, while the performance can be a wee bit stuttery as well. But the Redmi 9 can handle everyday life without much of a grumble, and it will suit any users on a stricter budget. Now, this sort of price point, you will also find the occasional Samsung Galaxy A series branded smartphone as well, which might seem quite tempting. I haven't personally tested most of these out, unfortunately, because Samsung isn't really particularly keen on sending out samples of its budget handsets. What I can tell you though is definitely steer well clear of the Galaxy A12, which is rather clunky and juddery no matter what you're up to, and definitely weak sauce compared with a lot of the other rivals in this best budget phone roundup. So that right there is my personal pick of the best cheapy handsets you can grab yourself right now in spring 2021. Of course, these smartphones I've all personally tested and reviewed, so I might have missed off your own personal favourite. Definitely feel free to put me a twat bag down in the comments and clue me in as to what your selection would have been. Definitely go check out my full reviews of any of these smartphones if any of them have particularly tickled your fancy, and please do poke subscribe, ding that notifications bell, all that other YouTube shenanigans, and have yourselves a fantastic rest of the week. Cheers everyone, love you.
Aí, o vídeo dele acabou. Canal da amiga.
Não, relaxa. Ela não foi pra piscina, pro terraço, pra alguma parte do hotel? Você tem certeza que foi ela que saiu, José?
Muito bom, muito bom.
Tá bom, obrigada, viu? Obrigada.
Vamos adicionar a verbinha lá na conta lá. Vamos ver se é verdade. É, segundo a informação, né?
Você não tá dormindo. Sofia?
Cadê a
O que foi que
folha?
aconteceu? Briguei com a Andréia. Acabei dizendo coisas que eu não devia, escutei coisas que eu não queria, enfim, ela foi embora de casa.
Pocket.
Não sei, você tem alguma ideia pra onde ela possa ter ido? Não sei, não.
Mídia. Vamos ver isso aqui. New, não sei o que.
Ela fez uma amizade. A amizade com quem? Fernando.
Vendo vídeos. Vamos ver vídeos aí. Power.
Irmão da Jandira.
Welcome everyone to Gamer Melt. Today, Intel's 11th Gen CPUs have been released and the reviews are in. And in honor of Intel's incredible ability to stretch their 14nm process all the way to 2021, I am reintroducing the 14nm plus Infinity mug. And well, I've had this for quite a while. That's actually Coke. I don't care for coffee. But they are pretty sweet, they do last, and if you want them to last even longer, I also have this 14nm plus Infinity enamel mug. Check those out at store.gamermeld.com. Once again, that's store.gamermeld.com. Also, I'll be going back to my normal video style in my next video. In the meantime, today brings us mining with a Game Boy. Cyberpunk adds ray tracing for AMD GPUs. RX 6600, Nvidia gives us free performance, and do not buy Intel's 11th Gen CPUs. Okay, first up for today, we have a new report from Tweaktown, and apparently someone actually modded an original Game Boy to mine Bitcoin. Basically, you've seen it all, and we've reached peak mining. What is fairly interesting is the fact that after all this was done, it only got a whopping 0.8 hashes, not mega hashes, hashes per second. And as they state, when you compare that to a current gen ASIC miner, pumps up around 100 terahashes per second, the Game Boy is 125 trillion times slower, at least at Bitcoin with ASIC miners. Now, obviously this is an ASIC miner. If you used a normal GPU, it would be significantly less than 100 terahashes, but it would be incredibly more than the Game Boy. I will say that I do find it really interesting kind of just to see how far things have advanced as far as technology in such a short period of time, and this definitely does show that off. Next up, Cyberpunk 2077 has officially released their new 1.2 update, and it looks like it actually does a ton of things. For one, they fixed a massive amount of bugs. Look at all of this. Fixed missing UI dialogue elements during this, environment levels, unbelievable amounts. So if you are still interested in that, hopefully this is, enough of those bugs fixed to actually make it more or less playable. But one main feature of this is that it actually adds ray tracing to AMD GPUs. I will say that I may actually test that out. If you want to see something like that, let me know down in the comments below. Anyway, next up for today, in a new driver that was issued for the Linux kernel HSA, it looks like AMD inadvertently unveiled how much Infinity cache their upcoming Navi 23, so RX 6600 GPUs are gonna have. And if you're looking at this, it pretty much is 32. And if you know anything about the Infinity caches of the other, like Navi 21 being 128, it is a significant drop. Though, to be honest, I never even really saw Infinity Cache being something necessary for the lower-end GPUs anyway, just because that was something AMD needed to do so they could have faster memory on the higher-end products instead of using GDDR6X that NVIDIA uses. As you know, most of NVIDIA's lower-end models use regular GDDR6 anyway, and I do believe Navi 23 is going to be using GDDR6, so while it is kind of discussed as being very, very little, I don't really see the need for it anyway. Either way, that little bit is at least fairly interesting. And next up, NVIDIA has officially announced that they've added resizable bar support to their entire RTX 30 series of GPUs and laptops. Well, GPUs and the laptops, so you really could just say graphics cards. But either way, their entire RTX 30 series has officially gotten it. And according to NVIDIA, they're showing upwards of 12%. They clearly, I have no doubt, showed some that, are going to show kind of the best case scenarios. So we're looking at upwards of around 10% at best. Though, of course,
Free performance is free performance, and I will say that we already have some testing from a user in the Chip Hell forums, and what they gathered using the RTX 3090. Now, maybe the 3080 gets a bit more performance than the 3090 when adding resizable bar. It only got about 3.17% on average at 4K. So nothing huge, nothing to write home about, but at the same time, like I said, free performance is free performance. And lastly, for today, Intel has officially released their 11th gen CPUs, and well, hold on. That is good, store.gamermail.com. Okay, so 11th gen CPUs. So if you've been following the news on this, you know that Intel technically released their CPUs a little while back for pre-order, but the embargo on the reviews wasn't going to be lifted until Intel actually released the CPUs today. And now we know why. They're bad. Well, sort of. Though even if you're looking at one of the SKUs that I personally consider to be fairly decent, and there are some, I do not suggest buying 11th gen CPUs, any of them. And I'll get to why that is in just a second. First, let's get to the performance. And first up, this right here is actually from Tom's Hardware, and it's pretty interesting because it actually shows IPC performance across Ryzen and then 10th gen and 11th gen CPUs, and you can see at least in Cinebench. Remember that IPC increase, a lot of people don't really know this, but IPC increase is 100% application dependent. Some changes that are done will help some applications, hurt some others, not really have a big difference, but overall you obviously do aim for a higher IPC, but in this case, Cinebench R20, Tom's Hardware actually set the clock at the exact same at 3.8 gigahertz and used a single thread, so it doesn't matter if it's a 12-core CPU, 86 cores, it doesn't matter. But either way, as you can see, the 11900K did in fact get a fairly decent IPC increase, at least in this, over 10th gen CPUs. So this is showing that new core, and it is a decent IPC increase if it weren't for the fact that it's been many years. So, with that said, let's get to actual performance. And I want to go ahead and show this one off right here. This is single core performance. You can see that the 11900K absolutely is doing quite a bit better and actually even beats the 5950X, at least right here in single core performance. When we move over to gaming, and I will say I'm going to show some other outlets besides Tom's Hardware, I just really like theirs because they will actually do an average of all of their games that they tested, so you can actually get a decent picture of how good something is with a single graph. And right here you can see that the 11900K at its best actually loses to the 5900X. Though really I would say that they're fairly neck and neck just because Intel wins some and AMD wins others. So you might be thinking, well, the 11900K is cheaper, so what's the issue? Well, don't forget that that price is actually based on Intel's US dollar per 1,000. Now, I don't blame Tom's Hardware for using that because that's really the only thing Intel gives us. Not only that, but a lot of times it actually can be right at that price, except this time it is not. You can see that the 11900K right now is selling for $613.99, sold by Newegg, and they are in fact sold out. But either way, right now at $613.99, it definitely makes the 5900X look better. Though of course some will argue that you can't get the 5900X, but you can't get the 11900K either. But really, even if the 11900K does lower to right around that price, I still don't suggest it. And this is one of the reasons why. We can see right here that Tech Power Up shows, now this is Prime 95, so it's going to be one of the worst case scenarios, but even in Cinebench, the 11900K is 419 watts. 419. Of course, you aren't going to be getting that high in most scenarios, but for professional workloads, if you're going to be using a lot of those cores, I would definitely argue the 5900X is well worth it when at MSRP. Another issue is the fact that, don't forget, this is an 8-core CPU. Yes, with the higher clocks and the IPC increase, Intel was able to, for the most part, get it to where it's decent enough compared to their 10-core 10900K, but when it comes to AMD's 12-core 5900X, it is not. As you can see in most multi-core benchmarks, the Ryzen 9 5900X flat out wins. Now this is single core performance, so I do want to point out it's decent there, although it still technically loses, at least at floating point integer. The 11900K does do better. But in most things that are going to be using all of those cores, the simple fact is that the 5900X completely crushes the 11900K. And you can actually see that right here, the 10900K still wins. At least when we're talking multi-core performance, you can see the single thread is significantly less. And moving on, both compression and decompression, the 5900X and 7-zip absolutely decimates the 11900K. This is 7-zip once again. You can see such a massive difference here. Adobe Premiere Pro, though I will say there are some things that Intel simply does better, primarily because of their architecture versus AMD's. And if you are someone who uses those applications, definitely get Intel over AMD. But for the most part and for most professional workloads, there's no reason to get the 11900K over the 5900X. Now, with that said, like I said earlier, there are some positives. Specifically, the 11600K. So as you can see, the 11600K at 5 gigahertz is right at the 5600X. It's actually neck and neck, but when the 5600X is used with Precision Boost Overdrive, you can see that it jumps by quite a bit. I mean, that matters, but when we look at pricing, you can see that the 11600K is $262, but obviously that doesn't always mean anything, except this time it is really close at $269. So while the 5600X is ultimately a winner, though, once again, a lot of times they are kind of switching back and forth. Personally, I will suggest the 11600K over the 5600X, how it's priced right now, and really even how it's priced MSRP. The simple fact is that it is a good buy, but I've already said that you should not buy 11th gen. So why is that? Well, that's because Intel has already announced that they're planning to launch their 12th gen Alder Lake this year. Yes, 11th gen does use a new core, but it's still running on the 14 nanometer process. That's holding it back significantly, store.gamermeld.com. But their 12th gen Alder Lake is finally moving down to 10 nanometers, and it's getting a full new architectural design using the big dot little philosophy. Now, I'm still somewhat on the edge at how big dot little is going to work when you're doing more professional workloads. They use all of those cores, but we have seen that it's getting a massive IPC increase, and don't forget that it still is 8 big cores and 8 little cores for a total of 16. So we'll definitely have to see just how well it does, but it absolutely should do significantly better than this. Of course, if you are wanting to buy this right
Vou fazer
now,
teste agora aqui no Telegram, rapaziada.
and for a gaming CPU, I definitely suggest the 11600K, to which I will have in the description as an affiliate link. It won't cost you anything more, but personally, I do suggest waiting. Now, talking 10 nanometers with Alder Lake, obviously, Intel has been known for pushing back releases, but so far, it really does look like it's going to be coming out at the end of this year. So hold out if you can. I definitely suggest it. So anyway, I hope you liked the video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. And as always, have a great day.
Sempre tem que voltar lá porque sempre é assim. Vamos lá, adicionar a conta. Vamos ver que depois a gente vai ver a parada aí. Vamos ver fazer 200 hoje? Vamos ver, hein? Ver que essa parada é de verdade, sim ou não. Vai ficar gravado aí, valeu, rapaziada? Começa a assistir o vídeo, vamos assistir.
Welcome everyone to GamerMeld. Today.
Já viu já? Vamos lá, vamos pegar isso aqui, ó, do homem. Deve ser um coletânea de filme. Tamo aí, mano, testando, entendeu, mano? Testando esse canal aqui, os conteúdos do YouTube, vamos que vamos, mano. É o teste.
Ah, what? No, what is that? Is it? Yep, it's Judder. The X90J cannot be recommended to gamers. The Judder is that bad. Completely taken by surprise. Never would have expected it. The X900H doesn't experience this at all. Gonna go into more detail on this later, but it looks like it's dropping frames as you're just panning around. So anyway, this is just a little taste of what's to come later. This video is a half review of the X90J, half comparison to the C1. And when I did the X90J versus X900H, it was after an 80-hour work week and it was 3 o'clock in the morning, and I just wasn't looking for Judder like this because I would have never expected Sony to take 2 steps back. Like, this is just crazy. Now here on the right is the C1, and it's just completely smooth. The other issue is input lag is higher, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So I had a lot more footage recorded, and after discovering these issues, there's really no point to most of it because the TV just is bad and can't be recommended. In the off chance that it can be fixed with updates, but it's Sony we're talking about, so I wouldn't count on that. I do have some other things in here to show, and I'm going to start with the Dolby Vision. Again, Dolby Vision on the X90J has this really weird green push on everything that I've tried with Dolby Vision. It's using it automatically detects Dolby Vision, switches to Dolby Vision mode, and pretty much left everything as it was, except for like disabling, True Motion and stuff like that I just don't prefer. So on the right is the C1, the left is the X90J, and like even just in dark black areas, it's greener on the X90J. Skin tones are greener. A lot of them, it just makes actors look like they're sick. And then also in the center of that hole, you can just see the difference in black level. Obviously, OLED's going to be better, but it's there's just something going on with the X90J in Dolby Vision. In SDR and HDR10, it's not that bad. There's maybe a little bit of a green hue, but not anywhere to the level of what it's doing in Dolby Vision. Look at this scene. I mean, Mrs. Classic walked in the room and saw this and thought the one on the right was way spookier and more natural, and that the one on the left just looked like crap. Like, that is not supposed to be green. This is from The Witcher, which is Dolby Vision, just streaming on Netflix. Alright, there's really not a whole lot really to say in this. Here I just have subtitles on in a dark scene to see if there's a lot of blooming. Doesn't really seem like blooming's an issue. The local dimming is set to medium. On the X900J, medium with subtitles presented quite a bit of blooming, at least for me, but setting local dimming to high. Didn't have as much blooming, but also wasn't as bright, so it was kind of a give or take. So maybe they worked that out with this one. It's there a little bit, but it's certainly not bad or distracting. And here I'm going to go through, show all the settings. I was using HDMI 3 with Dolby Vision, and then I used the Disney Wow disc on SDR for, brightness, color, and contrast. This is just out-of-the-box Dolby Vision settings. Like I said, since turning off a few of the motion smoothing or things like that. HDR tone mapping is on brightness, which is odd because this HDR tone mapping in HDR10 I didn't see it doing anything, but in Dolby Vision it clearly does. So peak luminance is high, auto local dimming is medium. This is just going through, just showing real quick if there's any visible changes. Color temperature expert 1 is where it's supposed to be. Live color off where it should be. I think Dolby Vision actually had the reality creation on by default, which I turned off. Because, I mean, why would a Dolby Vision content not be sharp? That was just weird. And then I'm going to go show the settings on the C1. And also the shadow differences and the luminance difference in the TVs, the camera accentuates. I have to adjust the ISO. Typically it's 400 ISO, makes the Sony look closer. And then for the C1 it has to be at 800, so I gotta bounce back and forth to try and get them to look like they actually do. And then on the C1, just all the AI stuff is turned off. You have to turn off the auto genre selection in order to adjust the true motion settings, or in Dolby Vision or HDR10. And then some people were talking about the screen brightness setting being too high. Well, anything under 56, it's clearly clipping black level. And then here in content, I was like using that tree. So like if I just put it down to 50, where it is out of the box, it's just everything is just clipped and too dark. I found around 58 to show more detail in the tree here. 56, like I said, is the sharp cutoff though for clipping. So I'd say anywhere from 56 to 58 was pretty good. Again, it's really hard to tell just from the camera. And the settings screen right now is all white because I had to boost the ISO to try and show the detail in that dark tree. So here I am turning it up really high, the brightness setting, so you can see what detail is there, bringing it back down. And I think it was 58 is what I settled on. So you can actually see the lines in that tree. And I'm turning the ISO back down, going back over to the Sony thing. Yep. And so you can see, I was just trying to bring out enough detail to see what you could see there. However, if you just look at the fog and everything in the picture, the Sony really has a strong green tinge, and it should not be that way. Yeah, there's screen brightness 58, and then moving on. Peak brightness is at high. OLED brightness high. Contrast it maxes out automatically.
Fala comigo, diretor.
Gamma is not adjustable with Dolby Vision. And then these are just default color settings for Dolby Vision. Color gamut is not adjustable either. In non-Dolby Vision, color depth needed to be turned up a couple points. So maybe I would do that. And if I'm not mistaken, it defaulted to sharpness at 20, and then super resolution and stuff like that was on the low. But again, Dolby Vision content is high quality. I'm pretty sure it's all 4K, so all that should have just defaulted to off, in my opinion.
Opa, que é isso?
And just look how green. It's not right at all. And again, the C1, it's not blue, it's the camera. See, if I turn up the ISO, see, and then like here, skin tone on the right is more natural. On the left, it's just very palish green, just almost sick-like. And then the stones in the back, it's not white and gray like it should be. So I'm assuming this is something that can be fixed with a firmware update. But again, Sony's track record with firmware updates is not good. But let's say they do fix this, they also have to fix the juddering issue, and I don't think they're going to be able to do anything about high input lag with a firmware update. Maybe I'm wrong, but I wouldn't count on it. And then here you can just see the snow looks green on the X90J.
Antártida.
Skipping over to some more skin tones. You know, Jason Momoa does not look like that, I'm pretty sure. And then like the window behind Ben Affleck here, green. That window, green. You tell me what you think. Is that how it's supposed to look? Because I really don't think so. Doesn't look like that on the X900H. Doesn't look like that on the C10 or the C1. Doesn't look like it on my old Samsung KS8000. Although that one doesn't support Dolby Vision, obviously, but... Alright, so now I'm going to go to some other tests to show viewing angles. Even dead on, you can see there is an issue. I mean, not really an issue, but just poor viewing angles on the X90J. The way this test works is all of those lagom words should look the same. It should just be even, like it does here on the C1.
Pra ver as letras, né? Eu acho que não dá não. Olha a imagem, a diferença de imagem.
You know, I was never really one who cared much about viewing angles. Even with the X900H, you know, the 85-inch, it has viewing angle problems, but I think this is worse. You know, I sit dead center, so it's not a big deal for me. But I gotta say, like, if you're walking in the room and you just want to peek around the corner at what's on the TV, there's times where the better viewing angles to me is important, but it's not that important. I know for a lot of people it is a major issue, though. So while these tests are being shown, let's talk about other options. 2021, what really is there if you want, you know, let's start with gaming. If you want a good gaming TV, Samsung has made a lot of issues this year. Sony's having a lot of issues again this year. Vizio's P-Series Quantum X just came out at the end of last year. It's supposed to be what they have all this year as well. It's got a bunch of issues and reliability problems. I really don't see any other option besides the LG C1 for 2021, like, or spend more and get the G1, but it's so far kind of looking like that's not really worth the extra cost. And yes, you know, the C1 is going to turn people off because it's OLED and they're afraid of burn-in, but honestly, even if you do play a lot of games, even if you do have the brightness turned up, I think there's enough precautionary measures that LG takes now that you should expect around 5 years, you know, up to 10,000 hours before burn-in could be an issue. You know, that's obviously not a certainty, but that's what I would expect. I've also seen lots of reports of LG doing one-time courtesy panel replacements for burn-in. So, you know, you don't necessarily have to get the Best Buy burn-in coverage warranty that's just ridiculously priced. You know, you pick up a last year C10 while you can, if you don't mind the near black performance of it. But otherwise, if it's later in the year, you know, that's gone. I think the C1's your best bet. And real quick, as you can see as I'm scrolling through these pages, the C1 is scrolling faster. Well, that's because of the difference in input lag. Right now, it's not on game mode, but I will switch it to game mode here in a couple minutes and show that it levels it out more evenly. But even then, it's a hair behind the C1, whereas the X900H pretty much matches it. It's pretty... if there's a difference,
Terminando aqui, mas rapaziada, vou jogar um bingo aí.
whereas even in
Valeu,
game
rapaziada.
mode,
Jogar
the
um bingo.
X90J, scrolling
Testar uns
here,
aplicativos aí de
these windows,
bingo.
you can still
Pra
see
ver
it lags
se
behind just a
funciona
tiny
aí,
bit.
show de bola ou não.
And then there's a
Chove
pattern on
muito
here
aqui no
also of
estado do
clock
Rio de
running that
Janeiro.
all you have to do is just
Agradecendo
pause and then
sempre
subtract the difference you
a
can
presença
measure
de
out
todas
the
vocês
input
aí.
lag
Se
that
inscreve
way.
no canal aí,
From the X90J
que a
to the
gente tá fazendo os
C1,
testes, né, meu
and
irmão?
the C1 has around 12 to 14 milliseconds of input lag. So you just add that to the difference, and then that would be the input lag of the X90J. Here I'm just scrolling through different colors, whites, blacks. You can see the panel uniformity, any issues in that department. There were a few colors that I could see some panel issues on the X90J, nothing terrible, but certainly something there. Especially like along the center, it's almost like there's a cross in the center of the screen. Alright, so now here, game mode, you know, maybe if you play it back in slow motion, you might be able to see a little bit more of a difference here. But there is a little bit of a lag versus the C1. And spoiler, I was coming up with around 32 to 35 milliseconds input lag. Anyway,
Vamos lá, rapaziada, chegou a
again,
fator aí, entendeu?
C1, and then the only
Daqui a
other
pouco a gente volta com a programação normal aí.
TCL, but they're
Chegou.
only doing 8K for their 6 series and up.
Pô, faz o bagulho aí, vai sair na live
Have
aqui,
to wait and
atrapalhar
see
aqui.
what they
Vamos...
bring and the
Olha,
price
tá
of
saindo,
them
vai sair
and
tua voz aí,
if they
ó.
function
Agora
properly.
vocês vão ver ignorante aí.
And
Não,
also
deixa eu
here, it
terminar aí.
almost looks like
Agora,
there's
escuta.
overshoot on the
Escuta você.
X90J to me,
Só terminar de
because
escutar você.
you see
Aumenta aí,
the
aumenta.
gray bar before the white bar, which would indicate overshoot.
Ó.
And then here, the clock running. Like I said, just pause the video, take the number that you see on the C1, and then subtract the number from the X90J. And you can do it multiple times.
Terminando aqui, vamos fazer uma live aqui do
most of the time, but you
do
can average
canal
it out. And for me, I was getting
Telegram.
around, 30 to 35 milliseconds or so. Alright, now I switched over to more gaming stuff, just to show
Experimenta, tá fazendo a gente voltar.
HDR gaming, and then also,
Ué,
if you want to look for
aqui, que agora quer me dar.
Calma lá, se for que
Porra, Lucas comeu.
input lag differences within the game.
a mulher guarda com cair.
And then once we get towards the end, going to be doing more judder tests. This is checking for ghosting and smearing, like if you look at the tree and with the dark area behind it, and just however much it smears with quick movements. That's caused by pixel response time. Alright, and now for the judder, stutter, whatever you want to call it. To me, it looks like it's dropping frames on the X90J. Just don't focus on the point of the crosshair, focus on the actual background. And I can tell you it looked a lot worse in person than it does on the camera. Yeah, it's just like focus on that mountain in the back and just, I don't know, it's bothering me to watch it now. And I'm usually not very sensitive to judder like this. So someone did suggest that you could fix the issue using the Cinemotion settings, and the issue is with game mode, you can't, I think it's the Cinemotion you can't enable. The smoothing, I think, is also grayed out. I'll have to be pulling that up in a second. And then if you go to standard mode outside of game mode and enable these settings, your input lag goes very, very high, just completely unbearable. Alright, and so see here on the C1, it's just smooth. That's how it should be. And I also checked this on the X900H, and it was similar to the C1, very smooth, no judder. So I don't know how Sony messed up this bad. Alright, so motion flow on minimum. The smoothness is grayed out. Clearness is all you can adjust, which is the black frame insertion. And then Cinemotion is grayed out. But with these settings, it did not fix anything. It's still juddery. It also did implement a little bit more input lag.
Ele tá se aquecendo, que ele pegou chuva.
Alright, now in custom setting with minimum and minimum on the motion flow and Cinemotion on low. The judder is gone, but the input lag is, like I said, just horrible. It's just unplayable. I could not play like this. Alright, so this is going to cut it here. I cannot recommend the X90J between the Dolby Vision color issues, the judder, and the higher input lag. I recommend paying extra for the C1 or trying to grab a C10 while you can. Otherwise, wait and see what TCL does. So I guess that's about it. Hope this helps you and stops you from buying the X90J, and have a good one.
Então, rapaziada, vamos agora para do bingo aqui. Caramba, eu fiz, mano. Caramba. É muita falta de atenção, velho. Eu não sei se é verdade essa porra. Só vamos ver depois. Rapaziada, a gente volta aí. Depois a gente volta. Agradeço a todos vocês aí pela compreensão. Mas eu vou ficar um
Deixa ele com ela
vamos
e nós
diante do jogo de camas. E vamos ver aí que eu sou bom ou eu sou ruim? Eu sou bom ou eu sou ruim? Atividade, hein? Será que eu sou bom ou eu sou ruim?
Tipo,
Eu sou bom ou sou ruim?
Aí eu pego outro gato.
Pega mais nada.
Pego sim.
Sou bom ou sou ruim? Hein? Fala comigo que eu tô afim. Que eu sou bom ou sou ruim? Então ele marcou atividade ali. Vou marcar atividade aqui.
Porque eu quero pegar um gato pra
Quero ver.
moldar ele igualzinho.
Falar com a Rose que eu tô assistindo Sandra.
Vou botar essa atividade aqui, porque aí eu já paro, né? Vou botar ele aqui, o danadão. Ó, já vem atividade. Boa, mano, boa. Não vai conseguir me apanhar, não. Eu vou lançar aqui, parceiro. Boa. E eu posso voltar aqui. Ah, atividade total, hein? Aqui, cara. Isso. Manteve o padrão, deu continuação. Calma, calma. Tá chovendo muito aqui no Rio de Janeiro. Vamos dar continuação.
Eu quero um gato pra botar o nome dele de mal.
É doideira?
Ô pai, eu posso dar esse gato aqui pra vizinha e pegar outro gato.
Vamos jogar aqui uma dama.
Ouviu, pai? Pegar um gato aí e botar o nome dele de mal.
Vem jogar online comigo, dama. Contra.
Que tamo?
Não sabe o que é isso, né, safadão?
Batata.
Ó, a transmissão já caiu, tá instável. Mas eu vou dar uma atividade aqui, ó. Uf. Vamos lá.
Deixa ele dormir. O bichinho tá mimino, deixa ele.
Tá enchendo o saco mesmo.
Fala com a Rose que eu tô vendo o Xander Rose.
Vamos atacar.
Xander Rose?
Xander.